Hey, it's Jodi
Hey,
Day.
it's Jodi
You know,
Day.
there's this common rumor or maybe a stereotype about retired people. Once they retire, they just sort of putter around the house, they lose track of time and what's going on in the world. Um, that's sort of me. I
Oh,
was like, oh shoot, I told Baker I'd jump on. Oh shoot, I've got Jodi in 5 minutes. So
yeah. Uh,
good morning,
oh,
all.
good morning. What's going on with my light? Oh, I forgot to turn on the lights. There.
Hey, Flux isn't able
Ah,
to redirect. Why isn't she able to redirect to you? That seems weird.
something showed up
Oh,
on my
Flux
live chat.
yeah, she just joined. All right, Fluxians just rated you.
Oh, okay. Hey, thank you,
Hey,
Flux.
Fluxians.
Yeah.
Did everyone remember to remind Flux to watch Rogue One this weekend? She has a homework assignment. If you guys aren't aware, she is supposed to watch Rogue One and answer 4 questions for me at the end. This confirms that, in fact, she did watch it. And so I'm expecting the your ditto sheet to be filled out and turned in Monday morning, Flux.
Mm. So,
Thank
Flux,
you,
did
being
you?
asshole.
Did you? Yeah. I've got. My significant other gave me a new soap that was supposed to be good for me, and I'm on you. I'm very glad that StreamYard has this filter thing
Filter, yeah.
because I am red. I had a bit of an allergic reaction to it, so I flared up with that soap. So, yeah.
Ooh, here, touch up my appearance. Does this do anything? There. Ooh. It makes
Oh,
my
you
skin
look.
look smooth.
Yeah,
We'll
this
turn
is
that
the.
off real quick.
Yeah, this is the filters. The improvement are staggering.
It's not what I look like in real life.
Yeah, this is the improved us.
That's the sad part.
All right, but it's Jodi Day,
Yes.
and we have an actual clinical psychologist on the stand, and she's
Yeah, it's
been.
no longer like a Looney Tunes cartoon of
Yeah,
expert witnesses, but an actual real one, which
yeah.
is interesting and it's so refreshing to hear. I'm still doing. Do you know if you're getting across today? Because I'm still interested in her cross. I want to see how she maybe fumbles or if she's just as assertive in cross. I have a feeling she's going to be just as assertive.
I think if I go, she will be on the stand for 2.5 days.
Okay,
So, and we are
it'll take
still
us a
on
few
her.
weeks.
Yeah, so it will take us a few Saturdays to get there. But yeah, she's good. And she's young as well. At the time, she was only like 33, 32, 33.
Oh, I did.
And
Did I tell you guys last time that I did reach out to her to see if she'd be
mm,
interested in an interview? She has not gotten back to me. Uh, I just reached out to her on LinkedIn, so I don't know how often people check that. But I'm gonna try to find some other contact information for her.
yeah, yeah, do so because she's really interesting, really interesting. And yeah, I think we should let's get on with it. And yes, this is the first Saturday with just Saturday streaming. It's the
Oh
regular
yeah,
2 hours, but if you give us incentive, hint, hint, we might go on for longer. Hint, hint.
and I'm
Now, as
already
usual,
losing the super chats and likes so far. Just saying, guys.
thank you, Erin Olivia. Not here, so here's my 2 for the no like. Thank you, Erin Olivia. Oh, yeah, as you know, Dave wants all the likes. So, but you can exchange. So you can allow Dave to win by not giving the thumbs up to my stream. But if you do, you have to super chat $2. Okay, to me, to me, to me,
Yes,
not
yeah.
that,
You
not
can give.
yeah.
You can take away one of Nicholas's thumbs up, with a $2 super chat to him and go ahead and me instead. That's our agreement, and I'm completely fine with that.
Now we start off with a sidebar, and I don't really remember why. And it's going on for a while. Let's see here. So that's one. There you go.
With regard to this issue involving Cheryl Karp, did you receive some documentation or a report from her?
I did receive a report.
And did you also receive some notes and test data from her?
That's correct.
And these results and this report and this test data, did it contain a diagnosis, yes or no?
Yes.
And this diagnosis that she had, is this something that you considered in reaching whatever opinion you have in this case that we haven't talked about yet?
Yes.
With regard to Cheryl Karp, is she a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
She's a psychologist.
Is she somebody that also, from reading the report and the notes and the raw data, did she also administer tests?
Yes.
Did she also have a clinical interview?
Yes.
And as part of, her diagnosis was also that was that of PTSD, correct?
That is correct.
But the triggering event of that PTSD, what was the triggering event that Cheryl Karp indicated that she and the defendant had talked about that formed the basis of her opinion that this was PTSD?
Dr. Karp indicated that the reason why Ms. Arias developed PTSD was a result of her alleged abusive relationship.
You were able to look at the abusive or the details of the abuse that were laid out by Cheryl Karp, correct?
Correct.
And that abuse that is detailed in Ms. Karp's report, did you compare it to the abuse that was given to you or related to you by the defendant?
Yes.
And were they the same or were they different?
They were very different.
In terms of the abuse that was related to, or that the defendant provided to Cheryl Karp, when you say it was very different, was it more or was it less abuse that was reported by the defendant?
She reported to Dr. Karp significantly more abuse than she reported to me or to anybody else that I had the opportunity to review the records.
So
that's interesting. Why would she report less to the state's expert?
Yeah.
This seems odd. I feel like if you were to say you went back through her prior medical records or psychological records, she reported less than she's purporting now. That would be consistent with what you would expect. But why would she report less to the state's expert? She knows it's the state's expert.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I'm wondering if she's just minimizing it or, well, they had less time together, right? 12 hours versus 40 hours. So there was less opportunity for her to talk. And we know she likes to talk. And, you know, in between paragraphs of information, there's that nugget of information that you really wanted to know.
Yeah, I agree. But are they because they talked about a person being a psychologist. Violette was not a psychologist. She was a therapist. She didn't have the education and wasn't allowed to perform tests. So who is this psychologist they are talking about? I don't remember. I only remember the defense calling two psychologists, or one psychologist and the therapist.
Well, you
so is this one that? So is this one that they chose to not call to?
Yeah, you can retain multiple experts or even just one expert and not call them and just utilize them during the trial.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible. And so maybe they just utilized this one that they're talking about to coordinate stuff and didn't end up calling them. Who knows? But Yeah, you could do that. That's a possibility.
Yeah, but if you retain a psychologist to perform tests and then not call it, do you have to disclose that to the estate?
Not if you're not calling them, but if you're using them as an expert, you have to disclose that.
Yeah. So if they used her report and then had the the guy and valet talk about that report, then I guess. But that sounds weird.
Yeah, because they'd be experts, so they'd be able to use any and all information, including hearsay and other supporting materials, to come to their opinion. So you could do that. You know, it's very common in like medical malpractice cases where there's multiple quote experts involved, but not all of them get called. But they all rely on each other's reports and evaluations.
Yeah,
or even think about the state's case with the medical examiner, right? The one that gets on the stand and testifies isn't necessarily the one that does the autopsy. That's a perfect example of it.
Hey, Cindy Lauhut.
Luhu. Welcome. Thank you. Oh, 10 months. Wow. You've been a member forever, and you're going to keep it forever. That's awesome. Good to know. Welcome.
Thank you for being Dave's member for 10 months. That she must have become your member at the time you were monetized.
It was monetized, I think, in April, and now it's March. So a month after is what I think. Or it could be now.
Yeah, but you
pretty close to the beginning.
Yeah. Nice.
Provide or indicate more abuse to Dr. Karp than she did to Dr. Samuels.
That's correct.
Did she provide or indicate more abuse to Dr. Karp than she did to Ms. Laviolette?
That's correct.
Did she provide more indications of abuse than she did to you?
Yes.
How many incidents of abuse did she indicate to you, or physical abuse, that there were?
She told me that there were 4 distinct episodes of alleged abuse.
How many events did she indicate to Mr. Samuels of abuse?
It's my understanding there was 4.
How about to Alice Laviolette? How many incidents did she report to her?
Physical abuse, is that what you're
Yes,
referring
physical
to?
abuse, correct.
4.
But in terms of Cheryl Karp, how many events did she indicate to Ms. Karp in terms of this physical abuse?
I can't even count. There was numerous reports of frequent abuse and threatening behavior.
But there was also some events of physical abuse. Were they more or less than she reported to you?
She reported significantly more to Dr. Karp than she did to me.
And with regard to the report to Dr. Karp, was that in the form of a document, or was it
What does that mean? I can't count them, but it's significantly more, or I was told significantly less. If you can't count them, you got to qualify that some way. That's right for cross-examination. That's what she's going to start hemming and hawing about on cross.
Oh, yeah, probably.
During the clinical interview that she provided to her?
It was part of testing.
So this test where she reported this elevated or significant physical abuse, what is that test called?
I believe it's called the partner abuse scale.
Cindy has been a member at my place for 9 whole months. Thank you so much, Cindy. Almost as long as MLS. Love you both. Oh, we loves you too. Thank you so much.
To review my records to be certain.
So, and as a result of the partner abuse scale, and as a result of this reporting, in your opinion, did you see what opinion Dr. Karp reached with regard to the defendant? What was her opinion as to whether or not this was PTSD?
She concluded that Ms. Arias had PTSD as a result of the alleged abuse.
And did she cite one single event that, if you will, triggered this PTSD, or did she indicate something else?
No, she did not specifically indicate one.
You now have that, and you now have that Cheryl Karp also gave some tests, correct?
Yes.
With regard to this testing, did you do any testing?
I did do testing.
And the testing that you did any of it relate to what Cheryl Karp had done?
Yes.
Okay, which test did you give in response to what Cheryl Karp had given?
I administered what's called the trauma symptom inventory. I did that because Dr. Karp had already administered that to her, and I was looking for consistency over time.
And what's a TSI is the acronym, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What is a trauma symptom inventory?
This
What
case-
is that measure? What are we looking at?
This
Oh.
case went on for 54 days, and they had like a couple of weeks where they had breaks.
Yeah.
So you add it all up. They started jury selection in December of 2012. And I think the jury came back with a verdict in June of
Yeah.
2013. So that's how long this trial went.
Yeah. And we have been covering it since May of 2023. And we will be going for
A year, pretty quick here.
yeah.
I think
That
a year
was-
is coming up next month.
Yeah. We actually thought we would be done by Christmas with this
We did.
coverage. Yeah. And that didn't happen.
It did not. And now that we're not doing Tuesdays, it's going to slow it down even more.
Yeah.
Is
But,
Jung still in the chat? Because I've been asking her questions. Is this at the time? So this is 2013. Are people still being diagnosed with things? Because I know today they don't diagnose people with anything. They say,
Yeah.
well, there's symptoms consistent with, right?
Yeah.
So, but they're
Yeah,
throwing
the-
around the word diagnosed, and she's
Yeah.
not correcting him. So I was just curious.
Yeah, but the DSM-5 were written but not published at this time. So
Yeah,
it was
that's what I was
published, I think, in 2014. And then they started to go away from diagnosis to symptoms, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this trial went on for months. Thank you for being here, Davil. Or D-A-Vel. I don't know, Davil. Yeah.
I like Davil.
Yeah. Let's continue.
Essentially, it's a self-report measure, which means that Ms. Arias was filling out a questionnaire. There's 100 questions. It's a measure of general emotional distress as a result of being exposed to some sort of trauma. The important part of this test is that it doesn't identify what the trauma is. It simply asks questions like, do you have nightmares? Or do you have intrusive thoughts? These are all indications of exposure to a trauma.
And this test, did you administer it one occasion or two occasions?
I administered it twice.
And what you told us that mostly, if you have a test, you get a result. What is the reason that you actually administered it on two occasions to the defendant?
I administered it back to back. I didn't come back and give it to her a different time. The reason why I did that was because on the TSI, it indicates that the person's to reflect back on the last 6 months of their life. Well, the killing occurred several years prior, and the alleged abuse occurred several years prior. So I wanted to make sure to follow the protocol that Dr. Karp did, which was to have her fill out the questionnaire as it pertains to the last 6
Indigo.
months of her life, again, while she was in jail. I also wanted her to reflect back to what it was like when she was in her relationship with Mr. Alexander.
And with regard to the TSI results of the last 6 months while she had been in jail, what is it that you found?
I found relatively consistent results within my 2 times that I administered it and with Dr. Karp. There was some slight differences, but generally similar.
Specifically, what were the findings with regard to the one that talks about the 6 months prior to the administration of the test?
May I reference my test results?
Sure, but let me have it so I can mark it.
Yeah, ghostly. They were concerned about stigma, from what I gather, associated with diagnosing somebody with things. It's used often in the courts, especially family law stuff, where you were diagnosed with PTSD and that sort of thing. There was a stigma attached with it. So they started moving away from it because one argument is that it didn't help the people deal with it and recover. It sort of put them into a box. That's the extent that I know of it.
Yeah, I mean, people go, oh, you have PTSD, you have antisocial, blah, blah, blah. You are diagnosed as a sociopath. No, so it was very stigmatic because sometimes it hindered progress in their development and treatment.
Yeah.
But once they started to use you have symptoms that correlates with this whatevers, then they could, because I checked this with a friend of mine, because then they can treat the different symptoms and see what helps and what not. Earlier, they treated more or less everything. Now they go into the specific symptom and see what can we do about this specific symptom. How can we improve that person with this symptom?
Exactly.
Now this is just me reiterating. So
yeah, no, I know. Yeah, that's why I wanted Jung to chime in a little bit, because I know she works in the field. But Gina asks, do we remember why Martinez was disbarred? So Martinez was disbarred for inappropriate contact with or conduct with subordinates and other women in the office. But he relinquished his bar card rather than having it taken, if that makes a difference to anyone.
Yeah, they were going to conduct a hearing about it, and he chose to relinquish his bar card instead of having a publicly, having a public hearing about it. Mr. Nurmid, he was disbarred properly because he wrote a tell-all book about Jodi Arias.
Yes, he did. I still yet to read that. I need to read that, but I've got so many Ghazni books stacking up. I feel like I need to read those first.
Take a look at Exhibit 620, and I will ask some questions, then ask you to review it, and then we will proceed. Have you reviewed it?
Yes.
Now, with regard to that particular test, in the previous 6 months before the test was administered while she was in jail, and let me go ahead and have it, that result, the exhibit. What did you find?
She was experiencing a number of symptoms related to depression, anxiety, a variety of symptoms.
And is that anything unusual given the fact that she was in jail?
No.
Now, with regard to the administration of the tests involving Mr. Alexander and her relationship to Mr. Alexander, what time period did you reference or indicate to her that the questions applied?
I wanted to be expansive, so what I did is I had her think back to January of 2007. The reason why I chose that date is because she indicated that he started to, albeit jokingly, but making comments to her that she didn't like.
And
Three-hole wonder
take a look at Exhibit 620 and see if that refreshes your recollection as to what your results were.
Yes, Mr. Nurmi is Jodi's attorney. Sorry, Nick, what were you saying?
So what were the results?
I'm just saying hi
of
to Indigo Luna.
TSI for that January 2007 period?
Again, very similar results. The most notable difference was that during that time, she was having sexual concerns, uneasiness about her sexual behavior.
And so when you say they were about the same, is she having anxiety? Is that what's going on or what?
Yes, anxiety, depression, indication of nightmares, intrusive thoughts.
It appears that, I guess, for lack of a better term, the profiles were the same, both in January of 2007 and when she was in jail and you administered the test.
Relatively the same. There were some differences.
This testing that you conducted, did you also conduct further testing? Did you conduct further testing other than this TSI, this trauma symptom inventory?
Yes.
Did you review Mr. Samuel's report to see whether or not he had administered something called a PDS.
Yes.
Objection to the referral as Mr. Samuels when he's a doctor.
All right, Ms. DeMarte, with regard to
hear
Dr.
the
Samuel's,
Sorry, what did you say?
I said I didn't hear the objection. I didn't hear what
No.
she was objecting to, but apparently it was sustained.
Yeah. And for you wondering why is the image jumpy? That's the stream we are picking it from, so it's not actually my fault. And for you who wonder, we are doing this via Vielhammer Media, so go subscribe to him. He has the subscribers, he has the hours, I think, but YouTube claims that since he's not doing enough. So hopefully we can have Vielhammer to.
Yeah, it's like, was it that he's not doing enough, or I was wondering if it was because he didn't have like enough of his own content or something. I don't know, but it's just weird.
Yeah, that's really weird because he has done a lot to the streams, as in audio enhancement.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So I don't understand YouTube. Yeah. Maybe he should have his maybe VTube stuff doing reactions to it. I don't know. I
thought he was explaining it a little bit in my Discord. I was just going to try to find it, but anyways, everyone needs to go subscribe to him regardless.
Yeah. And I need to fill up my coffee.
Oh, he's got the James Crumbly stuff too.
with regard to Dr. Samuel's report, did he administer a PDS?
Correct.
What is PDS stand for?
Post-traumatic stress diagnostic scale.
And what is this test looking to do?
The test is administered to determine whether there's a presence of post-traumatic stress disorder.
And were you able to look, well, what is it that Dr. Samuels provided to you in terms of the raw data?
Essentially a bubble sheet.
And when you say essentially a bubble sheet, what are we talking about?
It's raw data from the PDS.
And what is a bubble sheet? Explain to me. We all have seen bubble sheets, but how was this, your understanding, how was this bubble sheet created?
Well, typically the answer sheet is given to the person that's being evaluated, and they fill it out themselves as they're reading the questions that are on the questionnaire.
For example, when you've administered these tests to other people, do you provide them with the test approved sheet in which to mark the bubbles? If it is a bubble type test, do you do that?
Do I give it to them?
In other words, you administered the the MMPI, correct?
That's correct.
Is that also a bubble type of test?
Yes.
With regard to this bubble type test, did you, when you administer it, do you actually write the responses down on a legal pad and then transfer them for the person that you're testing onto the bubble sheet? Or do you just give them the bubble sheet to fill it out?
No, the answer sheet is given to them and they fill it out themselves.
Why not just do it on a legal pad as you sit there and ask them the questions? Why don't you do it that way?
That's not the protocol of giving the tests.
Is there a danger if you are filling out, for example, the answers and then transferring them over to the bubble sheet?
Sure, there's human error that's involved.
And is that the protocol that's followed in administering these type of tests?
No.
So you were provided with the bubble sheet, correct? With regard to the PDS, right?
That's correct.
And what was your understanding as to who filled out the bubble sheet when it was given to you?
I was under the impression Ms. Arias did.
And again, if Ms. Arias hadn't filled it out, would that, in your opinion, just your opinion, would that be a problem with the protocol in administering the PDS test or any test?
Yes, if there wasn't an extreme reason as to why that had to occur.
as you sit here today, can you think of an extreme reason why the person who is having the test administered is not filling out the bubble sheet?
No,
So you were provided though with the bubble sheet, right?
yes.
But in and of
She didn't
itself, the
fill out
bubble
the
sheet,
bubble
does it
sheet?
tell you anything independent of?
She did
No.
not fill out the bubble sheet?
They are talking about Dr. Sex Therapist. That he,
Oh,
yeah. So his how he did it, she claims, is the wrong way of doing it because that would be human error. If he, I don't remember because she answered on
Okay.
one sheet, he transferred it over to the test.
oh, I remember that. Yeah, because he had it filled out like on a piece of paper and then filled out the bubble sheet or something.
Yeah,
I remember him testifying.
and
Okay.
apparently that's the wrong way of doing it because then you can't exclude human error. Okay.
Yeah,
good
I
to
feel
know.
like she's probably right in that,
Mm,
but it doesn't necessarily invalidate the results.
probably not.
Looking at other sources, by just looking at these bubbles filled out, does it tell you anything?
No, it wasn't scored. It was just the raw data.
And did you have to look at somewhere else to look at the questions?
Yes,
And is that something else that's, as a psychologist, you have to go out and get, correct?
that's correct.
Was that provided by Dr. Samuels or not?
No, it was not.
So did you go out and get or obtain a copy of the test itself so that you could compare it then to what was on the bubble sheet?
Yes, I did.
And when you did that, what is it that you found with regard to the question that talks about the triggering mechanism for PTSD?
I found that she indicated that it was an event that occurred with a stranger.
And if in this case it's been determined that the event that we're talking about did not involve a stranger, it actually involved Mr. Alexander, if that were the case.
Oh, so she filled out that with a Dr. Sex Therapist while she was, if she indicated the triggering event was with a stranger, that might be that she was still telling the tale about strangers committing the crime when she did the test.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, does this induce a little bit of reasonable doubt? The problem is that it's her defense, so any ambiguity would work against her, not necessarily for her.
Yeah. Now, I'm wondering what would happen if this trial was today, because she claims self-defense. Today, that then the prosecution has to disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I think Florida has that statute nowadays of disproving.
Yeah, I don't know what Arizona is.
Yeah, Arizona. But I do know that most states today have, when you introduce a self-defense defense, they have to disprove it.
You have to present enough evidence to substantiate the self-defense claim, and then the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense.
Yeah, but I don't think they have done this in this case. So I don't think Arizona had that statute back in 2013. But they
either way, I
it,
think
yeah.
Jodi, the facts are so against Jodi, the evidence is so against her.
Yeah, I mean, just by her lies about the strangers, good luck.
What would that do to the validity of all of the answers that followed?
It would invalidate it. Can I explain why?
Sure.
PTSD is one of those disorders, one of the only disorders that we have as psychologists that we can directly link back the etiology, meaning where did this come from? It's a specific trauma. And the PDS actually does a good job because it asks for the exact trauma to be identified up front. And the symptoms that are then filled out are associated with that trauma. So for example, I have nightmares about that trauma. I have intrusive thoughts about that specific trauma. Again, there's a direct link. So in this situation, if the original item was, you said it was related to, was found what?
Well, let's say the answer that you looked at involved what? What was the trigger event on the PDS that you had?
That it was by an individual that was a stranger.
What if it turned out that that was an absolute untruth? That it wasn't a stranger, it was somebody that she actually knew. You indicated that that would invalidate the rest of the test, right?
It would absolutely invalidate the test.
Well, what about the position that, for example, that says, well, she still suffered trauma. It's just that she, maybe with a white lie that she told about what the triggering event was. If it was just a white lie and all of this other stuff here refers to the white lie, does that somehow validate this test?
It does not, again, because PTSD is strongly tied to what the actual trauma is.
So in terms of this PDS, if the trauma was not related to a stranger, in terms of the opinion in this case, is it worth anything?
No, other than it's other evidence that Ms. Arias decided to lie on a test.
Objection, Judge.
That's what I was waiting for. That's what I was waiting for. The problem with her is she gave 3 different stories.
Yeah.
This is why you don't talk, right? I mean, she's guilty and she was going to get convicted anyways, but you don't talk because all of your defenses go out the window as soon as you start talking.
Yeah.
But that was what I was waiting for. Yeah. She lied.
She lied. She's a lying liar who lies.
Today we would call it malingering, right? Malingering.
Yeah.
That was great.
And sidebar.
She can't say that she lied. I think that's a perfect opinion within her wheel well of expertise.
Yeah, because if Jodi in her test said it was done by the triggering event was by a stranger, and then says, "Oh, sorry, it was somebody I actually knew." Yeah, she lied.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid opinion.
Yeah, Mads. So Mads looked it up. That's exactly what we were thinking. It's on the defense to raise the issue first, evidence of justification, and then the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was no justification. I actually had a quasi self-defense sort of thing, but it wasn't self-defense. It was actually parental discipline in one of my cases not that long ago. But it was the same thing. We had to raise it, and then they had to prove, the state had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the parental discipline was not justified.
And Justin, if she never told, she may have actually got away with it. Yeah, I mean, if she hadn't contacted the cops and tried to insert herself in the investigation, they might have suspected her. But she called the cops and started talking, and then she was arrested, and she kept talking, and she kept talking.
Yeah. The biggest piece of physical evidence against her was the timing of the photographs contained on the disc. So even if she didn't talk, I still think they would have ended up charging and convicting her. It boils down to her talking. That's what easily got her convicted. But leaving the camera behind is what really ultimately would have convicted her.
I do think the defense would have had an easier time getting an expert to try to invalidate the dates on that card.
Yeah, because it wasn't like the camera was hooked up to, satellites and stuff like our phones are these days, where the dates and times automatically.
Ladies and gentlemen,
you had to manually set it.
Yeah, it's manually set it. Which they could have argued, no, she wasn't there. She actually wasn't there, and argued the timing. We don't know if Mr. Alexander changed the settings. We simply don't know. I mean, nowadays, webcam and a camera phone, that's more often than not actually connected.
It's hard to fake that metadata.
Yeah.
The objection to the last question, you were to disregard the last answer.
Oh, really?
Dr. DeMarte.
Oh, really? It was sustained.
It was sustained. Okay. Jury, go ahead and forget that the expert witness said Jodi lied.
Yeah, I mean, put the toothpaste back into the tube, shovel the crap back into the horse, unfuck the clusterfuck. I mean, yeah, sure, that works.
Please listen carefully to the question being asked and answer only the question being asked. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
Mr. DeMarte, with regard to the change story, do you know whether or not, or is it your understanding that the event that was cited as the triggering event for this PDS has subsequently changed in terms of what the defendant is saying.
I'm aware of that.
And because there's been this change to this other event where the defendant indicated that it was Mr. Alexander and her killing him that caused this trauma, do you have an opinion as to whether or not this PDS is valid as a confirmatory test for PTSD?
It is not valid.
And why not? Why isn't it valid? Especially in light of the fact that they're both trauma.
The questions on the test specifically go back and ask the person to reference the specific trauma that they identified on the test. She identified a different trauma. And so all of her questions, again, such as I have intrusive memories, were related to that event.
And in scoring this test, have you seen the scoring sheets in this case?
No,
Let's take it. So they were not provided to you by Dr. Samuels.
that's correct.
I can't retweet Farrell's tweet. That's weird.
Exhibit number 550.
I think she has a lock on her Twitter account.
Oh.
And yes, you can order this mug yourself.
Do you see there the number of symptoms
You can do
endorsed
it
is
via
17?
Yes.
my stream.
Once this
Below my stream
test,
in the
and then we'll take a look at exhibit number 535. And then you see the number of symptoms endorsed. Do you see that?
Yes,
Obviously, those are two different results, correct?
correct.
In your practice, once something has been scored, something such as this has been scored, is there a reason, and you've reached your hypothesis, and this confirms it, is there a reason to keep going back and rescoring something? Is that something that Michigan State, and as part of their doctoral education, is that something that they teach, that once you have a hypothesis, it's confirmed, that you keep going back and scoring it, not once, not twice, but 3 times?
No,
Why would you, can you see any circumstance or any necessity to score something 3 times?
the only reason why I could see that someone would rescore it is if it wasn't scored properly the first time, or if they were trying to manipulate the data. I can't think of another reason why.
One of the other
That's
tests that
damning.
was administered by Dr. Samuels was the MCMI. Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Going to show you exhibit number 541. Was this provided to you by Dr. Samuels?
yes,
And if we take a look down here at the bottom, it does talk about PTSD. Do you see that?
yes.
And then it talks about a 10, and then a 69, and a 69. First of all, with
Ooh,
regard to this 69, if we go up
Of
to
course,
the top, it
she
talks about an
scores
unadjusted
69.
base rate score. What does that mean?
Statistically, they just adjust it. So we usually go off of the final base rate score.
So does that mean anything, or do we really need to, if not ignore it, look to the final?
Look at the final base rate score.
And in this case, what was the final score?
For PTSD, it was 69.
And then if we go to the next page, it talks about base rate scores. What are base rate scores?
Just symptom presentation, symptom endorsement.
So, but what's the importance, for example, of having a 60, a 75, 85? What does that mean?
Well, in any psychological test, there has to be some sort of threshold that has been designated through research that essentially tells us as psychologists, if it's past this threshold, it's meaningful. If it's not past that threshold, it's not clinically relevant.
So for example, let's say that we were talking about PTSD, and we have a score that's between 60 and 75. Could I or you, as a psychologist, say, well, you know what? Yeah, that's what we have in this score, but because I've been practicing for 35 years, I'm going to ignore that. And because of my experience, I'm going to look at the number between 60 and 75 and say that that's indicative of PTSD. Is that the way it works?
No.
Why not?
Well, again, there's a threshold that's set forth by research, and you follow the threshold. It's identified in the manual. You certainly don't pretend like the score isn't there if it's below 75, but it's not telling us that it's clinically significant, which after 75, it becomes clinically significant.
And by clinically significant, that means that that's an indication, correct?
Yes.
In and of itself, does that mean that if the person has an elevated score between 75 and 85 under the PTSD marker, that they automatically have PTSD?
No, that's just one data point that's then incorporated with all the rest of the aspects of the evaluation.
And this This is called the Milan or Milan also.
Milan.
And with regard to this Milan test, if it's been scored once, is there any reason, once you, and the scoring, if it's done by a computer, let's assume it's done by a computer, is there, and that doesn't have human error like the PDS, you can tell, can you tell us whether or not it was scored, this is exhibit number 550, can you tell us whether or not it was scored manually or whether it was scored by a computer?
I would make the assumption that it's manual because it's handwritten.
And with regard to this,
he's even yelling at his own witnesses.
MCMI, by looking at this, can you tell us whether or not this was done by a computer or manually?
Looks like a typical computer printout.
If, for example, if this is done by computer, do you see a need to go back and rescore this thing?
No.
Is there any reason to suspect or any reason that you can think of to go ahead and rescore this thing once a computer has done it the first time?
Only for the reasons that I highlighted before.
And what are those reasons?
That there was some sort of error that was made or that the data was being manipulated.
And if we take a look at exhibit 535,
Okay, another sidebar. Skip through.
This is a good rebuttal witness.
Yeah, this is because she is basically destroying both experts from the defense.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Martinez did do a decent job with undermining their opinions in the middle of all the shouting and stuff. But this is actually destroying it because if I remember correctly, the doctor, sex therapist, really tried to explain why even if she didn't reach the threshold, it was still PTSD. And here she is explaining, no, we have a threshold and it's based on science at the time.
Yeah, and he went into the whole cross-examination regarding the 69 and manipulating running the test 3 times. And
this,
and now all of his cross-examination is essentially getting reaffirmed by an expert, which is a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Ms. DeMarte, this MCMI score or test, first of all, do you know what norming is? What does that mean?
Norming is just a reference group. It allows us, whenever there's a test taker, we can compare their test scores against the average normative reference group population.
This MCMI, this test, do you know what population it was normed against?
Yes.
Why is he screaming? He's always screaming. Mr. Martinez is always screaming, regardless who the witness is.
It's like it's his energy. I get it, but it just sounds bad.
Yeah.
But he's been doing it for 2 months now in front of the jury, so they're probably used to it.
Yeah, and I think we said it early on that he might win despite himself. The evidence was just, there was just too much evidence. Now he is regarded as a hero of sorts by many people who like his style. But I think
he was villainized by the presses at the time for being too mean to his witnesses and to Jodi and everyone else.
Yeah,
but now he's whatever. In hindsight, they're fine with him.
Yeah, but I think it has more to do with Jodi being so awful.
Yeah, that's exactly why he won.
Yeah.
And what was it normed against?
It's normed against what's called the clinical population. These were individuals who were seeking treatment or I believe it was treatment in an outpatient setting or inpatient setting. So these were individuals who were already identified as having a psychological disorder.
So if you are looking at the results that we have in this case, for example, in exhibit number 553, are they being compared against the non-symptomatic population? Or are they being compared against a population that has already been determined to have some sort of mental health issue?
A population that's been determined to have mental health issues.
So if we're trying to take a look at an individual such as Ms. Arias, in your opinion, why would we need to look at her behavior in comparison with somebody who has psychiatric issues, or has mental health issues already?
Okay, nice. With Clotho gifted a membership. Thank you so much.
Nice.
And Nessa's Finds got a membership. Congratulations, Nessa. You now have access to all my members-only content. And you also have, in the community section, you will have a link to my Discord. So thank you so much, Vince. That's very, very, very sweet of you. Thank you.
I saw your construction update stream, your members only stream, a week ago or so. It's been a while, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah. And yeah, the renovation is going slower than anticipated because the cost of material are stupid high at the moment. I mean, when we started the renovations back in 2017, 2018, the cost now is 3 times higher for lumber. And
yeah. After the bid, it went skyrocketed, and then it's very slowly coming down.
Yeah, very slowly coming down. And
I have Swedish lumber, by the way, in the US now.
Oh,
we never had Swedish lumber before.
Yeah, because here, exported lumber is another price setting than buying it here. And it's infuriating because once the CVID happened, some of the workers we used, which is a family to my cousin, they couldn't get here. So we thought, well, no need to buy a lot of materials because they can't get here because restrictions and everything. So we waited. And then prices of lumber and everything skyrocketed. Yes, Justin, David wants Swedish wood.
Definitely.
Is that a problem, or is that something that you can do?
Well, I've used the MCMI myself before when I was working at the state hospital, and I found it to be very helpful because at that time I was working with individuals who were already deemed to have a psychological disorder. In a situation like this, my job was to determine whether there was a psychological disorder that was present. And the way that we do that is we look at symptom patterns and see how do they differentiate from the average person. So because of that, I would choose not to use a test like this.
And you have used this test in the past, correct?
Yes.
Now, are you familiar with the materials and the approach taken by Alice Laviolette?
Yes.
What approach did she take with regard to this case in the evaluation?
She took a different approach, a much more subjective approach, in that there was no testing that was conducted. There was no report that was written, so there was nothing, excuse me, there was nothing for me to read, any report that she wrote, any test data so that I can compare.
And so when you say that this was a much more subjective approach, is there something out there? For example, you were talking about these tests involving Ms. Karp and Dr. Karp and Dr. Samuels. You were told about these tests that you could actually run and compare yourself, right?
That's correct.
But with regard to Ms. Laviolette, is there any objective way that you could go back and look at something to say, oh, I see, this is how she reached the result, and I've been able to verify that result?
No, there was no report, there was no test data.
So what is it that she did then?
What she did is review.
Assumption, experience, relevance, speculation.
Calls for
Lack of knowledge.
speculation.
Approach.
There you go. Lack of knowledge calls for speculation.
I mean, she first of all, I think she is allowed to speculate, and second of all, she had. I mean, Valette, whatever her name was, if she has no
Valette.
test, but you have to speculate about how her result, about her opinions. If she has nothing written down,
That's
I mean,
true,
you
but-
still have
but
to
you-
rebut it, or being allowed to rebut it.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
But there still has to be a underlying factual basis for the opinion. And I think that's what she argued. Instead of speculation, which they are allowed to speculate, she argued lack of knowledge. So it's probably a more appropriate objection.
Yeah, but then again, I have it's a bit weird because, well, lack of knowledge. Yeah, it is because you used an expert that didn't write stuff down. So there is no knowledge to gain from. You have to, you can't just use an expert who refuses to write things down. Then the expert should have been not used. I don't know. And a sidebar. Speed through.
Alice Lavia.
Sustained.
With regard to Alice Lavia.
And it was sustained. Again, 2 sustained objections. That was a while ago. That was a real while ago, but I assume lack of knowledge was correct.
That's a good.
Provided any materials that she created, such as notes.
Objection has to be answered.
Overruled.
I was provided with notes.
Were you also provided with an interview that she conducted in November of 2012 with the prosecutor? The audio tape.
Oh, the audio tape, yes.
And did you review that audio tape?
Yes.
And did you take a look at the notes that were provided to you?
Yes.
Did you, for example, the audio tape, did she discuss the approach?
Oh, I wonder if it changed to lack of foundation, lack of knowledge, and now he's providing that foundation and where his expert is getting the knowledge.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. Well, if you can establish a foundation, so he's going to go into all that.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody, by the way, have you pressed the thumbs up? Have you pressed the subscriptions? Now, you are supposed to get over to Dave and give him all the thumbs up. And then if you don't provide the thumbs up on my page, you have to pay a $2 super chat fine for it.
It looks like you have more thumbs up right now. I think it's because they have to pay. That's a disincentive for giving me the likes.
So they are choosing to give the thumbs up instead of paying. Oh,
yeah.
Ah,
We need to rethink this.
yeah, we need to rethink this. Here's the thing: I don't want to speed run this witness either by doing the $1 a minute skip ahead. I really don't want to do that because she's actually good. I like listening to her.
Yeah, I like this witness a lot, actually.
Yeah. So I guess you have to super chat and gift memberships because you like us. Could that be show us love? Show us love by monetization.
Exactly.
That she took in this case.
Yes.
And with regard to her approach that she discussed, what was your understanding of the approach that she took?
She interviewed Ms. Arias and she looked at records.
And with regard to the approach as a psychologist, what is your opinion as to the validity of that approach?
Objection to the foundation.
Overruled.
There's a big piece of missing data there, which is giving tests.
Okay, and so what would the test have done?
It adds another objective measure.
And in this case, isn't that at all, correct?
Can you say that again?
There isn't any testing that she did, correct?
That's correct.
But how would that be important to Alice?
Two separate
Lavia's
chats on
approach?
your end.
Objection to judge lack of foundation with regard to domestic violence.
Yeah. Our respective YouTube channel, we have our separate chats. We see them both in StreamYard. So
I've been trying to figure out a way for us to put both chats together, at least on stream, so that people could see them together.
Yeah, I think I can do that on the Rumble.
And Streamlabs will allow us to do that too,
yeah.
but not through StreamYard.
Yeah, because on Rumble, I figure it out again how to, because then up in the top right corner, you can have a scrolling chat from all of it, I think.
Yeah, that would be nice to have something like that.
Yeah, I will have later today, and when I mean later, I mean around 10 or 11 p.m. I will have Serial Killer Saturday on Rumble exclusive. I will start with YouTube and Rumble, and after 15 minutes, I will close the YouTubes down to direct everybody over because YouTube hates my Serial Killer Saturday stuff.
Yeah,
really, really hate it. But I will use the Rumble Studio and I just found out how to get the scrolling thingy done. Okay, but we're here for Jodi.
You may continue.
It's another piece of data that would be able to be incorporated so that it's not just information that's coming directly from Ms. Arias in a clinical interview.
And for example, in this case, are you familiar with the fact that there have been changing stories with regard to the defendant and events involved in this case?
Yes.
If that were the case, that there are this changing stories about the events, does that add anything, or does that raise a red flag to you with regard to the approach that Alice Laviolette used?
Absolutely. If there's inconsistencies with Ms. Arias's report, then we have to be concerned about which information that she gives us is accurate or not. So the more data points that we have to make a final conclusion, the more accurate it will be.
Ma'am, in Exhibit 600, one of the
Yes.
things that was discussed, for example, with Alice Laviolette was, and it's a instant message between Reagan Housley and Travis Alexander, and according to Alice Laviolette, that was on May 19th of 2008. In it, Mr. Alexander indicates that he is extreme. He indicates that he is extremely afraid of the defendant because of her stalking behavior. And one of the things that Alice Laviolette told us was that, well, she didn't believe him. And she gave her reasons for that. Do you see anything in her approach, the approach that you are familiar with, do you see anything in her approach that would give her or you or anybody the ability to go behind the words and pass on the truthfulness or untruthfulness of that statement?
Objection is characterized as Ms. Laviolette's testimony.
Overruled. You may answer the question.
This is one piece of data that can be used as objective, and it can be used with everything else that is collected. There's nothing that you can say it's in written word. It was given. You use it as a piece of data.
And so saying that you don't believe it, for example, her saying that she didn't believe it, and you...
Objection is characterized as testimony.
The jury is directed to recall the evidence provided previously in this trial by the witness. You may continue.
With regard to whether or not this is something to be...
Oh, that was interesting.
The jury is directed to...
That is a jury's instruction in the middle of questioning. That was weird.
Something's going on in these sidebars.
Yeah.
And the attorneys are given specific directions, and the judge, said something like, hey, if you go outside of these, I'm going to instruct the jury to listen to the previous
or rely on their memory about the testimony from Ms. Violette.
Yeah. That
sounds like a jury instruction in the middle of
What's
the trial.
interesting is they're challenging a lot of what we would call malingering. If you guys watched the Letitia Stout trial with me last year, there were like half of the questions on the psychological stuff, because she claimed insanity, was about malingering, which is essentially lying or faking the results and things like that, or faking the syndromes, or not the syndromes, the traits of the whatever it is. Anyways, but they're hammering all over this woman about lying, maybe because of the word. Maybe malingering hadn't been a common practice or assessment at this point.
Yeah.
I just find that interesting, because that's what was all about Letitia Stout, was that.
Oh, let's see here. Arizona Supreme Court reinstated the allegations after the lower court dismissed them. That's interesting. Okay.
Believed, does her approach lend itself to being able to make an assessment of when somebody is being truthful or untruthful just by looking at the written word, the objective data?
What that does is it changes objective data into subjective data.
And what do you mean that it changes it over to subjective data? What does that mean?
That if you were to give that same written word to somebody else, they may subjectively interpret it different rather than looking at it for what it is. If the words say something, that's what the words mean.
And so if you have the changing of the data, of the objective data, morphing over to subjective data, what does that tell you under this approach? Or does that tell you anything about the ultimate conclusion or opinion that is rendered based on this subjective interpretation of the words?
Objection, lack of foundation.
The things complaint or what does it say?
You got a new subscriber. Oh, there you go. You know, the ethics
Hey,
complaint,
nice.
yeah, that
Thank
I
you,
pulled up.
Debbie.
Mendez would stare at the chests of female employees at the county prosecutor's office. Yeah, that's essentially, and he would just sort of follow them or look at them or whatever. I don't know. It was all looking. It wasn't like he did anything else. He would just sort of, but you know, he only stands to about here on most women, so he's just looking straight ahead.
Yeah, but if I remember correctly, there were other more serious things that he supposedly
I
did.
didn't look into it.
If I remember correctly. But thank you, JK.
I'll be
Approach,
right
please.
back.
And sidebar.
Overruled.
Now, with regard to this subjectification, I know that's probably not a word, but taking the objective word and turning it subjective, if you will, and knowing the approach that was used with regard to Ms. Laviolette, and I'm just talking about not anything specific, but the actual opinion that may be rendered on this type of approach. Is that something that you believe would lead to a valid opinion if you are taking words that are objective and then making them subjective?
It's unreliable.
And why is it unreliable?
Because in that situation, then there would be no objective data that's being relied upon, and that would mean that the approach is completely subjective.
So, for example, if we go back to exhibit number 456 that we've talked about already, and the approach were to change or make subjective what is written there in the first sentence, would your opinion then, would it be a valid opinion, irrespective of what the opinion is? Do you believe it would be a valid opinion? Were to read, for example, the journals and then change the words, would that still render, in your opinion, a valid opinion?
The judge mischaracterized the testimony as to changing the words in the journal.
Overruled. You may
That was
answer.
a weirdly worded question.
It would make it
Sorry?
I said that was a weirdly worded question.
Yeah. But the objection was overruled. So here we go.
Okay.
subjective and unreliable.
Is there, for example, any course that you've ever taken when you were studying to become a psychologist that indicates that that is an appropriate approach in a forensic evaluation?
No.
You indicated that you did administer some tests, and I think that you indicated that you administered one, the TSI, when we talked about that, right?
Correct.
You also administered other tests, right?
Correct.
What are the other tests?
I administered what's called the abbreviation for his RAT, a wide range achievement test.
Thank you, Rachel Hope Brintesen Engelhardt. Nick, any chance when you're up north, so close to Wisconsin, will you be able to see Saul or visit Zach? Zach Anderson is innocent. Just wondering if you were thinking about it. Love you both. Thank you for your super chat.
Well, you're staying with me for a bit.
Yeah, for a few days.
Potentially coordinate something if they kind of want to come this way and we can kind of go that way. I don't know. We had talked, actually, Solomon and I had talked about him coming out to go like sailing and stuff like that over the summer. Maybe we could coordinate that.
Yeah, for you who don't know, I will be doing Matsuri in Houston between August 8th and August 11th, and then I will do a road trip through the United States between August 12th, and I think I will be up in Michigan around August 18th. I will take 6 days of travel because it's a it's a lot of miles. And around 18th or 19th, and then spend a few days and then fly back the 22nd or 23rd, something of the sort. I haven't actually purchased the return ticket yet. So
you know, so I might have a permanent house guest.
Yeah. Dave, employ me.
Lena's like nudging me. She's like, so when's he leaving?
I can stream your trials.
That you could do, yeah, absolutely.
I will be your
Oh.
social media coordinator.
There you go, perfect.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Yeah, there is a chance that we can make that happen because I don't go to the United States that often, but this year I will.
Mads, to answer your question, no, you don't need to get like a permission, but you do need to be placed on their visitor list. So you need to somehow communicate with Zach, and Zach would need to put Nick on a list of saying people that can visit me, and then that's how that would work generally.
Yeah. Now, those aren't easy to come by, those permissions, because maybe a press something. Yeah, I don't know. We can. Let's coordinate with Solomon first, and then we can see where we go from there.
Sounds good.
Well, let's talk about that one before we get done with the acronyms. The RAT, or WRAT, why did you administer that?
The self-report measures such as a TSI and another test that I gave, which is referred to as the MMPI, there's certain reading thresholds that are required in order for someone to take the test independently. So I wanted to make sure that Ms. Arias met that threshold so that I could give her the test and that it would be valid.
So in other words, you wanted to see, as what appears to be saying, you wanted to see if she could read at a certain level, right?
So I gave her the reading subtest.
Right, and that's the WRAT. That tells you that she could read and could take the other tests, right?
Those were my findings.
And how is that test put together? I mean, it just ask questions, or explain a little bit about that test.
It's a very brief reading test. It's just a matter of presenting her with a list of words and asking her to read it out loud to me.
All right. Then what other tests did you administer?
I also administered what's called the WAIS. It's an intelligence test.
And that's WAIS?
Correct.
You know what that acronym stands for?
Wexler Adult Intelligence.
And why were you, what does this test measure? What is it that it's measuring?
It's a test of overall intelligence.
And so you administered it. Are you familiar with the term IQ?
Yes, it's the same as intelligence.
And so this is an IQ test?
That is correct.
And this IQ test, is it just one straight IQ, or is it divided into 4 subparts? Or explain to me about this.
Do you know the history of the IQ
So the way
test?
that the test works.
Not to get.
Yeah, roughly it's they started doing it in the late 1800s, and then it developed. But everything about it is through wealthy white Europeans.
Exactly. It's actually part of the basis for eugenics.
Yeah.
Like the original theory is that with eugenics is that you can breed poverty and morons and drunkards out of society by making sure that, proper respectable people breed with proper respectable people, sort of thing. And so they developed the IQ test to determine like who was an imbecile or a moron, actually is what they termed it, and fit to breed, and who was not. That's the basis for the IQ test.
Yeah, but they have adjusted it several times, but it's still not a correct representation. It is somewhat correct when it comes to Western countries, but I do know, there are claims by some interesting people. Oh, look, the people living in Africa are doing so poor on these tests. Yes, that's because it's not adjusted to their living standards and stuff like that.
So it started in like the late 1800s, and then it kind of moved and became popular in the early 1900s. And then by like the late 20s, people started saying, I feel like we could probably educate people. And that's,
generally, people with a higher education score better than people without a higher education, and they discovered, it has to do with their education. If you take a person with not even a high school diploma, but you actually train them in that test, they can score up to 20 points higher just by training the test. So it's not an accurate measurement, but it does give some indications.
From a sociological standpoint, and sociology as opposed to psychology is looking at like an ant farm as opposed to a single ant, right?
Yeah.
But from a sociological standpoint, it can give you some interesting information that
Mm.
you can correlate with averages and stuff like that. But it doesn't tell you anything about the individual, and that's what they're trying to do here, is talk about the individual.
Yeah. Now, I do know that the Mensa test is individualized as much as they can do, but it's still not. It's like, what you call it? It's like a tool mark. It's not really evidence. It's an indicator, but it's not evidence.
Ghosterly is sourcing the PBS 2012 documentary, probably the one that I went down a eugenics rabbit hole like last week. I was watching a bunch of videos on it. It was interesting.
Yeah, I see totally not a Russian bot, but we do. They do have. There's a span. If you train in the test, you get better results in the test, in the IQ test. Even with the Mensa test, even though the span is a bit lower, it's I think it's ±5 points if you actually train their test.
And those ones that you can download on your phone and do like IQ tests and tease your brain, I feel like you get more out of an Angry Birds app than those.
Yeah. If you can solve this puzzle, you are a genius thing on Twitter is not an IQ test.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And if you take those tests, you're probably and believe in them, yeah, you're not a genius.
I love the ones that say 90% of the population will get this question wrong, and then it just sparks all kinds of debates in the chat.
All right, but let's see where Miss Aries scored.
Is that there's an overall intelligence IQ of the individual, and there are 4 different domains that comprise this overall intelligence score.
And what are the 4 domains that are involved?
There's one domain called verbal comprehension, essentially the person's ability to verbally formulate words, their word knowledge.
How about the other domains?
Another one is called the perceptual reasoning domain. You can think about it as someone's ability to put together puzzles. So it's essentially nonverbal intelligence.
The third?
Another is called working memory, the ability to take in different pieces of information and keep it in your short-term memory while you utilize that information in some sort of way.
And with regard to this short-term memory test, what results did you get?
She performed well on it.
Was there ever an indication there that somehow she had any problems such that her memory was affected?
No.
How about the last one?
The last domain is called processing speed. Essentially what that tells us is how fast someone can think.
So what was her overall score or IQ score?
She scored relatively high in the above average range.
And what was that score, do you know?
May I reference my records?
Sure, give it to me.
Above average compared to what standard? Here's another thing.
I'm gonna check the underbot.
Here's another thing with certain countries like Japan has an average of around 105 to 107 on these tests, while other might be in the high 90s in their average. United States, yeah, but Jesus Christ, you're a large country. You have to check compared to who as well.
That's
So
what I always say when people try to compare like Sweden to the US. It's like take Sweden and Michigan because it's roughly the same population and footprint, you know?
Yeah, and weather and close to the sea and stuff like that. So it's quite comparable. But you can't compare Sweden to Florida at all. It's
Spain and Florida.
Spain and Florida, maybe Portugal and Florida and stuff like that. But yeah.
Not rebuttal.
Overruled.
She's writing a book for sure. Gwendolyn. Didn't she auction off her notes, if I'm not mistaken? Or no, she's drawing. She was drawing during the show.
Because it seems like statistical analysis is very subjective, averages, etc. Yeah, we have a saying over here: You have lies, absolute lies, and then you have statistics.
Which lie, absolutely.
Statistic is the presentation of the information you put into it. So it's only a result. It doesn't mean absolute truth. It's all about what you put into the questions that you then rely on. For instance, and you can do a lot of things with, for instance, statistics on opinions. Yeah, but there many of these statistical bureaus, they have a certain amount of control questions before, and they can do some subjective things with those questions if they want a specific result in the actual test.
Yeah.
So it's really 82%
The Golden
of
Globes
us.
are not accurate. That's exactly right.
Statistics, yeah. I prefer, and here's the thing: I'm not good at math. I mean, you can measure distance, for instance, what's a light year and stuff like that. The redshift, yeah, but you can actually measure and control measure the redshift when it comes to light years and how far away a certain star is. That you can objectively measure.
Mm-hmm.
You really can't measure opinions.
Well, you can't measure opinions, but the other thing is you can't measure education. You can sort of gauge insincerity or malingering, something like that, but that's only measured against other objective facts, right? So if you're just using the subjective opinions or questions or answers rather by somebody, this is all fluff.
Good at review it. Once you've reviewed it, please give it back.
Yeah, I don't think psychology can be objective, even with tests.
What was the overall IQ score?
The overall IQ is 119.
And did she achieve a score on any of these 4 domains?
For a person with a 119 IQ, she's incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
Was in the very superior range.
Yes, and the first domain that I described was the verbal comprehension.
And what did you score there?
I believe it's 136.
Take a look at it. Okay. And when you say that's very superior, what does that mean? What does that mean?
It's the highest possible that you can get in terms of descriptor domain. So it's very high.
Did you also administer another test?
Yes.
What was that?
What's called the MMPI,
And what does that stand
Yeah,
for?
136.
the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
And personality.
What do you say? Sorry.
They said that she got 136.
Well, yeah, on a specific part of it.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
All right. Because overall, that's moderately gifted.
Yeah, so if she got 136 on one point, then she could score 50 on another. I mean, no, not quite, but average, and some part may be lower. I don't know. I haven't seen that test. I have no idea.
Oh, I see. It's all broken down. Oh, this gets so complicated.
The inventory, what is it that test is supposed to measure?
The MMPI is one of the most commonly used tests in forensic settings and overall. It's a measure of general psychopathology, so the presence of mental illness and general personality characteristics.
Is that normed against the general population, or is that normed against those that have mental health issues and may be in a facility?
The normative population is an average typical group.
So, and you say that it's personality. What is it that, when you say personality, what is it that it's looking at?
Well, personality is characteristics that we all have within us, and it's how we relate to people. It's how we relate to the world. It's carried within us at all times. It's who we are. It's what makes us up as people.
So with regard to personality, for example, if the prosecutor, let's just assume somebody's a jerk, for lack of a better term, is that personality? Is there such a thing as being a jerk?
And not using that verbiage.
Being a jerk? What?
And
She's a liar. She's a jerk.
We need Norm MacDonald to say those words. What a jerk. And she, as soon as that psychologist entered the stand, Jodi stopped using her glasses.
Yeah, she does put the glasses on when she. I feel like it's arbitrary, or when she
Yeah.
thinks it'll be a good
Mm.
look.
Yeah, I think she's comparing herself to the psychologist on the stand. Because they have similar hair color, similar builds. I think she's jealous, and she tries to copy that psychologist.
She didn't get the memo about the bangs, though.
No, she didn't.
Even in 2013, those were bad.
Yeah. That's a long-ass sidebar.
Both, Justin, both. Actually, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation. No, there was. There were some incidences of that.
Ghostred says, yes, 136, within the verbal comprehension realm. So she understands what people are telling her.
Yeah, I was looking at the breakdown, and they like break down to all kinds of subcategories, and then there's an overall score.
That's a really long sidebar. All right, here we go.
Overruled.
Ma'am, we were talking about this issue involving, well, Mike, can you read that back? All right, I'll look at this.
I'll look for it.
We were talking about MMPI. Let's talk about the MMPI. One of the things that we were talking about was personality in terms of the MMPI, correct?
That's correct.
And in terms of a personality, and I started to say jerk, do you remember that?
Yes.
With regard to personality, when does an individual, and you said that jerk isn't exactly what you mean, what is it exactly that you mean with regard to a personality?
I was just saying that that's not a terminology that I would use.
Okay, what would be the terminology that you would use?
A potential personality trait would be aggressiveness.
All right, so if you have let's say aggressiveness, would manipulation or being manipulated, is that a character trait?
Yes.
So let's say that, for example, when does this personality trait start for an individual? Does it start when they're 30? Does it start when they're 15? When do these personality traits start?
Personality is developed throughout life. It's thought to develop relatively early as a child, and it's referred to as temperament, then develops into personality. So we can see it at a very, very young age.
When you say very, very young age, what do the studies show is a very, very young age?
Starting from toddler years, that's the beginnings of it, and continues to develop throughout childhood, adolescence, and becomes much more firm in adulthood.
What a
How is
horrible
that
pain in
different
the ass,
from,
Jodi.
let's say, somebody who is in a situation that is not such?
Sorry, I was just saying what a horrible pain in the ass Jodi would have been as a child.
Oh.
It starts at like toddler's age. Oh my God.
Oh.
A good situation, and they're depressed because of that situation. Is that the same thing as a characteristic?
No, that would be much more situational, and I would determine the difference between that by looking at patterns of behavior.
So are you familiar with the terms Axis 1 and Axis 2?
Yes.
What is Axis 1?
There's a diagnostic system that's used in the diagnostical and statistical manual, so essentially what we use to make diagnoses. Axis 1 disorders are thought to be much more transient disorders. They're called clinical disorders. That's not necessarily the case for everything that falls under Axis 1, but it differentiates from Axis 2 in that Axis 2 captures what are called personality disorders, in addition to other spectrums that tend to be more long-lasting, like mental retardation.
So for example, if somebody is in jail and they manifest a certain profile, is that an Axis 1 profile or an Axis 2 profile?
What profile are you referring to?
Well, let's talk about somebody who, let's say, is depressed and they're in jail. Is that a characteristic, or is that just a mood that may pass?
We're talking about personality. If there's no indication that there was any kind of depression in the past, then I would label it as non-personality.
And so the MMPI that we were talking about, it measures the personality, correct?
Right.
And how is that important in making an assessment in a forensic setting?
Because it gives me the opportunity to look at personality features that may be present in the individual in terms of in a maladaptive way.
When you say in a maladaptive way, what does that mean?
So, as a psychologist, when I diagnose someone with a personality disorder, what it means is that the personality trait has essentially become maladaptive. It's not helpful to them. It causes either distress with them or the people around them, or cause some sort of impairment in their life as a result of it.
And How many questions are involved in this MMPI?
There's a lot. There's 567.
And this administration of the test explained to us how it is that you administer this test and whether or not there is a bubble sheet that's associated with this.
There's a answer sheet, and then there's the actual test itself with the test items. I gave it the answer sheet and both of the items to Ms. Arias and asked her to complete it and asked her to read the directions that are on there that indicate that she's to answer these true or false questions as they typically relate to who she is. Are they mostly true or mostly false of her?
Would you ever have a situation where you just, for example, read the test to her and then marked on a legal pad what the responses were, rather than using the bubble sheet?
No.
Have you ever done that?
No.
Do you know anybody that has ever done that?
No.
And so you did receive, once you get done with that, how is this scored? You do it manually, or how is that done?
Now, I put it through a computer system so as to ensure that there's no errors. It actually makes me score it twice to make sure that there was no error while I was entering it.
So once you get this,
I would have a ton of cross-examination regarding the whole idea that she could be exhibiting these symptoms as a result of her being incarcerated, and that they're not necessarily part of her personality. I would have a ton of cross-examination. He specifically brought it up, I have a feeling, because they're going to address it. So I'm curious to see how that works out in cross.
Yeah.
I heard, though, that cross is bad. Someone said in chat that cross is really bad.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Scores, is it just one big score, let's say 100, 50, 75, like we saw with the MCMI, or is it something else? What do you get?
It's somewhat similar to MCMI in that there's a number of different what are called scales that are identified on there.
Let me stop you there. When you say scales, are you talking about sections, for lack of a better term? Is it a section that you look at, or is it something else?
That's one way to look at it. It groups essentially the answers into meaningful categories. That's a better way, categories such as depression or tendency to somaticize, meaning that experience psychological distress through somatic physical symptoms.
Are there what are called validity scales as part of this MMPI?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why it's used so often in forensic settings. What a validity scale does is it tells us what the test taker's approach is, meaning that it tells us whether they're exaggerating their symptoms or whether they're downplaying their symptoms, whether they're defensive. It can even tell us whether they were confused on the test and tended to answer it in an inconsistent manner. So this allows us to either rely on the test results or not rely on it.
And in terms of these scales or sections, how many validity scales or sections are there?
There's roughly 9.
And with regard to the defendant, those 9 validity scales, what did they indicate?
It indicated that I was able to use the results of the test.
And what about the other scales? What is it that you're looking at with regard to the other scales or the other columns or whatever's involved?
Well, there's a number of different scales. There's a group of scales that are called the clinical scales, which are the primary areas that I looked at. I looked at the whole test, but those are the most important.
How many scales are there that you designated or that are designated as clinical scales?
There's 10.
So, and that's the ones that you focused on, right?
I looked at all of them, but that's the one I'm discussing now, yes.
And why is that one important to you, these clinical scales, these 10 scales?
There's this term called face validity, meaning that when you look at items on a test, if it has high face validity, you're able to read it and know what you're being asked in terms of what it would relate to. So for example, I cry all the time. Would clearly.
I find this really interesting, but
I
I
do
can
too.
also see how jurors might be zoning out around this time. Because they are really technical.
Zoning out, but I pick up on things and I'm thinking about them, like the whole when he was asking her about, incarcerated individuals feeling depressed and things like that and having different symptoms. It's not a part of their personality. So that got me thinking about stuff. And I was thinking for a good solid 5 minutes or so. And then I realized, oh, she's still talking. So I zoned all that out. So I don't know. That's what's going on in my head.
Well, in my head, sometimes there's a little monkey with 2 crash cymbals going ding, 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 ding.
Be related to depression. It has high face validity. So with this test, it tends to have lower face validity, and the validity indicators capture the test taker's approach for those clinical scales. So it tells me again whether they are being honest or not on this test.
And these clinical scales with regard to the defendant, what did they tell you, these 10 clinical scales?
The results of her MMPI were interesting in that, again, there's 10 clinical scales. What I typically see when I administer this test is that there is 1, 2, maybe even 3, what we call elevations, meaning that their score went above 65. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that's the threshold in which we as psychologists know that it's kind of like a tap on the shoulder that tells us this means it's clinically relevant, that there's something going on in this domain.
So the cutoff or the threshold for these scales, these 10 scales that we're talking about, is the number 65, right?
That is correct.
And if it's above 65, it's something that is worth looking at again because it may indicate something. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, so go ahead. What else did you see?
So what I found is, again, there's 10 scales. What I found is that 7 of the 10 scales were above that threshold. The majority of them were.
Dave, do you have something you want to show us?
You want to see what goes through my head? This is when I'm trying to sleep at night. Yeah, so that's me. I don't have a monkey with crash cymbals. I got Darth Vader with bagpipes in a pool because why not?
Oh, thank you. We needed a distraction. Oh, that was funny. Oh, yeah. By the way, this is sometimes the risk with experts. They are experts. They can get a whole lot technical. And it's kind of your job to get them down to layman terms. I don't think she's using layman terms at the moment.
No, she's doing an okay job, but again, at the end of the day, she's still an expert that knows way more than the jury ever will, and has to somehow convey that, So.
Yeah, and as Gwendolyn said, you can tell she really enjoys her job. I don't know if she still does it 10 years later, but at that time, yeah.
She has her own clinic now. That's all I've been able to gather.
Oh.
So I reached out to her to see if she wanted to do an interview because I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
We're above that threshold.
So 7 of the 10 were above, of the clinical scales were above the threshold, right?
That's correct.
So what does that mean to you now that you've read some of the materials, you've then had the clinical interview, you've administered these other tests, and now you're doing the MMPI, and you have this elevation on 7 of the 10 scales or areas. What did that tell you?
Because there were 7 scales that were elevated, what that means is there was a lot of data for me to look at. There was a lot of personality indicators, signs of psychopathology that were then present. So the way that is typically handled when there are that many elevations is that then I examined the top 2 and 3 scales that were the highest. And I was able to interpret those scales into meaningful personality characteristics.
So the top 2 or 3 scales that you interpreted, what did they relate to?
The top 3 scales indicate that people with this personality profile tend to experience a lot of aggressiveness, hostility, defensiveness. But interestingly, these individuals do a relatively good job on a day-to-day basis of not displaying it to people. So this isn't someone who's walking around consistently hostile, throwing things where it's visible to other people, but they're still experiencing those emotions inside. In times when they feel like they've been wronged in some sort of way, or when someone has done something to hurt them that they perceive as hurting them in any kind of way, the way that it's described in the literature is they have these violent outbursts that are described as seething, as very angry. And what they tend to do, what this profile suggests, is that these individuals tend to externalize blame. So for example, I acted out this way because that person deserved it. So they externalize it. They say, it's not my fault. I didn't.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. I hope she's going to say the words histrionic personality disorder. I don't, yeah. If she says that, I'll be a
what
happy
Mom
camper.
and Pa used to call a fragile ego.
Yeah. Yeah.
Act this way because I have these strong emotions inside. I act this way because someone did something to me. That's how they're able to conceptualize it and justify it in their mind.
And so in this case, the defendant's scores or on the scales indicated that, if I understood it, that she internalized the anger. Would that be fair or not?
Objection, speculation. This was a general scale, not specific to Ms. Arias.
All right, we're going to take the noon recess at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please be back in the jury room at 1:25. We will start promptly at 1:30. Please remember the admonition. You are excused.
We're going to go check out Vielhammer Media.
Yeah, thank you to Vielhammer for removing the breaks and the lunch and stuff like that, so we don't have to. Thank you, Vielhammer Media.
No, that sounds very familiar too. Just a lot of people I encounter day to day. Amber Heard, all kinds of stuff like that. Or even that case, that family law case that Baker was streaming the other day and today.
Yeah. I mean, people who, there's plenty of example of people who just loses it. And
I've always attributed to a fragile ego, and now we have some sort of technical medical terminology for it. But someone sent in the chat, they watched her testimony and found it very interesting, learned a lot. I find this very interesting. I like this.
Yeah.
Good testimony.
Yeah.
Day to day, tell us more. Yeah. Not the Amber Heard, but Amber Heard.
The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Martinez, you may continue.
And then we left talking about the 3 scales of the MMPI on the clinical portion that you reviewed, correct?
Correct, the top 2 and 3.
And then you gave us, before lunch, you gave us your impression, not your impression, but your opinion about what those meant, right? Before we
Yes.
left. Are you familiar with the term floating profiles?
Yes,
And does it have anything to do with the MMPI?
yes.
What is that?
A floating profile is when you see that there are a number of elevations, such as I described earlier on the MMPI. When the vast majority of the clinical scales are elevated, again, that threshold is 65. When it's elevated above 65, it's called a floating profile.
And why is that significant in this case as it applies to the defendant?
A floating profile is commonly seen in individuals who have borderline personality disorder.
Right. You also indicated that you
borderline personality disorder. I think
Getting
that's the
closer.
old that is the old description of what is now called histrionic personality disorder.
Yes, we're getting closer
If I
and closer
remember
to Amber Heard. Yeah, no, you're right. I think you are right.
But we do have people in the chat that might correct me if I'm wrong in that. Rephrasing, I know we have people in the chat that will correct me if I'm wrong.
You administered the WACE test. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Why did you administer the WACE?
When I first started reviewing the records, there was indication in those records that there was a sense of immaturity that was present. For example, in Ms. Arias's booking profile, the way that she took the picture, she kind of smiled as though it was a high school photo rather than a booking picture that you would typically see. This to me.
What did I tell you? No, borderline and histrionic are all type B personality disorders. Different but related. Okay, so both still exist. Thank you, Rare in the History.
Good to know.
I told you, if I'm wrong, if I misremember, there will be people here in the chats that will correct me. Thank you.
Was strange. I found it to be strange and immature. There was also
Immature.
things that happened surrounding that suggested that there was, again, some immaturity there, such as her parents had indicated that she was described as being happy as hell when they came to visit her in jail. There was behaviors like this that were aberrant, that were strange, and it made me wonder whether there was some sort of intellectual deficit there that could be contributing to this, which is why I gave the intelligence test.
And you were able to determine and find what you found, what you've already told us, correct?
Correct.
As a result of that, in the testing that you did you reach a diagnosis or did you have an opinion at that point, or did you do more testing?
I conducted the 4 tests that we've already discussed.
And after that, did you have an opinion as to what the diagnosis was in this case?
After looking at that, taking in consideration her behavioral observations and all of the different pieces of information that I had, yes, I did.
And what was that?
I diagnosed her on axis 2 as borderline personality disorder.
What does that mean?
Generally, borderline personality disorder, you can think of it similar to what we see in teenagers often. This sense.
Here's the thing.
Haven't we been saying this
is
the
she
whole
allowed to diagnose her?
I don't know. There's no
isn't
objection.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that against the Goldwater rule? You can only diagnose somebody who you treat. That's the Goldwater rule.
I don't know. But okay, so maybe from a medical standpoint, but not necessarily from a legal standpoint, because I use people that look at reports and say, yeah, I would diagnose this person with this and that. Now, they're not basing it off of characters in movies; they're basing it off of the actual medical examination and reports. But what all of this is like, yeah, that's exactly what we've been saying. She acts like a 12-year-old. She acts like a teenager. She's immature. She's got a shallow ego. She gets excessively angry and lashes out. Everything is consistent, which is what I'm liking.
Yeah. I have to check the Goldwater rule. Goldwater rule is in Section 7 in the American Psychiatric Association's Principle of Medical Ethics, which states that psychiatrists have a responsibility to participate, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is psychiatrist specific, not psychologist specific.
Also, there was something about they have to actually conduct the evaluation, not necessarily treating, though.
Yeah.
Someone that's not personally evaluated. That's the thing. Personally evaluated. So she can do a personal evaluation.
American Psychological Association.
If she's a perpetual 14-year-old, then Salvador might actually have a chance.
Okay, let's continue.
Of immaturity and what's called emotional lability, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But generally, it's about instability. There's unstable interpersonal relationships, unstable emotions, and an unstable sense of identity, meaning who am I as a person? There's this constant fluctuation. There's a lot of manipulation that's involved with people who have borderline personality disorder and a large sense of immaturity. You can, again, think about a teenager. One of the items that's been talked about is the DSM-4. And TR. Do you know what the DSM is? Yes. What is it? It's a diagnostic and statistical manual, which is information that we use to conclude on diagnoses. It gives us specific symptoms that are present to suggest the presence of a psychological disorder. Are you familiar why there is the TR version? What that means? The TR version is the updated version of the DSM-4. Is it the same thing as the DSM-4 or is it something different?
Yeah, psychiatrist equals medical school, whereas psychologist equals graduate school. And Miss Voilette, which we listen to, she doesn't have a graduate degree. She only has a PhD. And that's why she couldn't be a psychologist, if I remember correctly.
Does this woman have a PhD? Oh, she's doctor, right? Okay.
Yeah, she is a clinical psychologist. So she has graduate school, but not medical school, if I remember correctly.
And Jodi knows all of this opinion is going to come out because she's had access to this woman's reports. So she's sitting there, I'm just going to draw away.
And JK says, correct, psychiatrist is a medical doctor. Okay.
Did she watch?
It's not completely different. They are similar in terms of criteria for various disorders. The vast majority of the criteria stay the same. What's different is the subsections of every disorder. For example, a subsection in there might be, how do you differentiate X disorder from Y disorder? What are the features that we look for that tell us that it's one versus the other? So that's an example of one of the sections that was updated, such as adding additional diagnoses that say, you know, these two disorders might be confused with one another. Here's something that you consider to differentiate. One of the things that we've looked at with regard to post-traumatic stress disorder is that there was a number of sections and a number of characteristics under each of the sections. Is the same true for borderline personality disorder under the DSM-4? It's not laid out exactly like PTSD in that there's just a list of symptoms rather than categories like it is with PTSD. But it does have some characteristics. That's correct, symptoms. Let me go ahead and have something marked.
Yeah, PhD equals doctorate. So technically, I'm a doctor because I have a Juris Doctor degree.
Are you familiar with Exhibit 622?
Welcome to Dr. Dave.
Okay.
That's right. Let me diagnose you.
Yes, this is a copy of
I'm
the
just going to
DSM.
ask you some
And
simple
this is a
questions.
copy of
Please
the
remove your pants.
DSM-4 involving what?
The DSM-4TR involving the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder.
I may have that back. Does it also include the diagnostic criteria?
Yes.
And do you know those off the top of your head, or will this refresh your recollection as to what the diagnostic criteria is?
I know them off the top of my head, but I think it would be helpful to have it.
Right? Go ahead and take a look at that 612. Let me ask you about it.
If I remember correctly, Voilette was only a therapist. She didn't have the educational level to call herself a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't know what that is compared to, but she claimed she was Jesus Christ, what was her
Psychologist.
no, therapist.
Oh.
She, Jesus Christ, what was it? I know it.
Clinical social worker.
No,
I mean, there's all
she's-
kinds of levels of different things. I don't know.
Let me check here.
You know, you could say that Rand Paul is a doctor, but so is Ken Jeong. So, you know, oh no, is he a dentist or a doctor? I can't remember. And then he went into acting and showed his peen all over the world.
She was a psychotherapist. A psychotherapist. That was what she called herself.
Psychotherapist. I don't know what that is. I got to like Google the
Once you-
levels of mental health professionals.
Yeah.
Reviewed it. What is the first criteria that DSM-4 lists for a finding or a diagnosis of a borderline personality disorder?
It's called frantic efforts to
Well,
avoid.
without reading it, if you need to
Okay,
read it,
sure.
read it now.
No need to read it.
What's the first one in that?
Efforts to avoid
Judge, may we
real.
have the- right.
Efforts to avoid
Oh,
real
hold
or
on.
imagined abandonment.
What is it again?
Efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment.
Yeah, we.
That sounds like Jodi.
Yeah, we have been saying that all along. I mean, she always lined up the next boyfriend before she broke up with her present boyfriend. That way, she was never alone. And this is where Travis was different, because he broke up with her, and she didn't have anything lined up. She tried to, but yeah.
Yeah, and then all the other things, you know, the animal cornered in the corner, you know, lashing out violently because her ego got bruised. You know, we had the right diagnosis, but the wrong terminology is really what it came down to.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists or medical doctors?
So that's the first one, efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, correct?
Correct.
And in this particular case, what did you find as it applied to that?
In the case of Miss Arias, I found that this was a symptom that was characteristic of her.
Why is that? Explain to me how you found that.
First, let me explain fears of abandonment. As humans, we don't want to be alone. That's part of human nature. What we find in people who have borderline personality.
Technically, Justin, she had, he was just an alibi, I think.
They dry humped, according to him.
Yeah, but
So-
that was just hours after she did the stabby, shooty, slicey, slicey. She went
They have a heavy petting, I think is how it
heavy
was
petting
described.
activities, and he didn't notice anything abnormal about her. Just hours later.
I wonder if she's going to be diagnosed with was it psychopathy? Where you basically have like the psychopaths, right? You can go out and stabby and then go home and be normal.
I don't think I haven't seen any. I've seen histrionic personality disorder referred to her later on, and but I don't think I've seen her as having a diagnosis or psychopathic traits. I haven't seen that in any of the articles I've read. If you, Vince Clotho, if you can't write prescriptions, you aren't a doctor.
Nurse practitioner.
Well, prescriptions is just medical advice on paper. I advise you to take these medications. You can still choose not to, just with the legal advice.
Ah, see? Lovely
Nurse
Beth got it.
practitioners.
Nurse practitioner.
Mm.
Physician assistants too. That's right. Yeah.
No, Jaki, Jodi did not get pregnant with twins. Had Jodi been doing the same things now as she did then, she might be doing the fake pregnancy thing to Travis. I wonder why she didn't. I wonder why she didn't think of that with him.
Yeah.
Maybe because they rarely went into that hole, so she couldn't get pregnant.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. They used the other two, so wasn't a viable excuse.
Personality disorder is that they have a very strong desire to be attached and to be close to people. They have a terrified feeling of being abandoned by others. So what we see when I'm looking for symptoms when I'm looking for signs of the symptom, I'm looking again for a pattern that has happened over time. In terms of this, what we see in people with borderline personality disorder is that they engage in behavior to try to keep people close to them. But ironically, these kinds of behaviors often push people away. So in the case of Ms. Arias, this was demonstrated throughout her relationship, throughout life, and also with Mr. Alexander. For example, after they broke up, when they broke off their relationship, she then moved to Mesa to be closer to him. I also interviewed his brother, Steve, and he indicated to me that Mr. Alexander—
Without telling us what he said, what characteristic did you find?
this fear of abandonment. This
Okay.
tendency to overstep boundaries, to be intrusive. Ms. Arias herself notified me that she had checked his Facebook without his permission, read text messages without his permission, engaging in these kinds of behaviors of, don't leave me, let me see what you're doing, I want you to be near me. There was indication from friends that highlighted her tendency to engage in these intrusive behaviors by spying on him, by being intrusive with his space in general.
Okay, and so did she meet this characteristic or this
Yes.
criteria? What is you need to take a look at the exhibit. What's the second criteria?
Unstable and intense interpersonal relationships.
What are they doing?
What are we talking about there?
Okay.
People with borderline personality disorder have a very difficult time maintaining what we would consider healthy interpersonal relationships. What they do is they have this tendency to split people, meaning that they have a tendency to either idealize them on one hand or devalue them and despise them. And what I mean by that, idealize means that they put this person up on a pedestal and nothing that they do, no matter what, they view them as being perfect. Whereas devalue and despise, no matter what they do, they dislike them, they're upset with them. And what we see with individuals with borderline personality disorder is that they tend to shift between these two types of interacting with people.
So give us some examples, if there are any, involving the defendant.
I did find that Ms. Arias met the symptom for borderline personality disorder. She had a very strong tendency to go from boyfriend to boyfriend, one after another, which is also another example of fear of abandonment that I just highlighted. What I found is in these relationships, there was a very strong tendency to idealize the men that she was with. For example, she had indicated to me that Mr. Alexander was not faithful to her during the relationship, but nonetheless, she still had this devout love for him. And you can see even within her journals, the way that she talks about her boyfriends and her partners in general, it has this very adolescent, immature, for lack of a better word, a saccharine kind of feel to it, a very strong, sweet, wanting to make them happy, feel to it, doing anything possible, keeping them idealized despite what was going on in the relationship.
How about the next characteristic?
The next characteristic is identity disturbance.
I'm really liking
What is
this
that?
testimony.
Again, I'd like to relate back to thinking of a teenager. When we're young, we all develop a sense of who we are as a person, and that can shift when we're younger. That could shift in many different ways. But what we find as we grow through adulthood, that becomes much more stable. We have a good sense of who we are as a person, what our beliefs are, how we engage with the world. It becomes relatively consistent. You have an idea of who you are. What we see in people with borderline personality disorder is that sense of identity is not there. It's not stable. It's changing. It tends to change depending on who's in their environment. And this is also a symptom that I found in Miss Arias. You can see this in her tendency to join the Mormon church really quickly. You can also see this in the records when her ex-boyfriend, Daryl, was talking about her pattern of behaviors. He had indicated that at one point he had indicated that there was a point in which she had changed the color of her hair, bought a certain car, and acted a certain way to be consistent
Chameleon.
with his
That's what I
ex-wife.
term it.
Again, this tendency to shift who she is. She had indicated to me that when she was with one boyfriend, she behaved one way, whereas with other boyfriends, she behaved a very different way, lived a very different lifestyle.
Give me an example of that.
For example, with
I have had girlfriends like that, and they are, I mean,
Well, there's
this
a
might-
difference between like taking your, like when you get married, right? So your wife's hobbies and your hobbies, or your wife's friends and your friends, there's a kind of like a blending of it, as opposed to abandoning everything about yourself and becoming that you think your partner wants. We call it like boyfriend chameleon or girlfriend chameleon.
Yeah. It's just because everything she was interested in with her prior boyfriend, completely abandoned it once she met Travis.
Mm-hmm.
Then she was all of a sudden very interested in religion, hiking, stuff like that. And now we are over 2 hours in. I think this has been really interesting.
Yeah, I'm liking this. I could watch this for the rest of the day, but I do have work to do, and I have a stream later. And I know Mo is going.
Yeah, Mo is going, and she's having I'm not sure what she's doing. She's doing
legal
some
shenanigans.
legal shenanigans theater, which is like a Mystery Science Theater 3000-esque thing.
Yes.
So we will be sending you all over there.
With Vielhammer.
With Vielhammer, yeah.
Yes.
And if Vielhammer is dual streaming, you get in watch hours and stuff. I'm not sure. But you can hear Vielhammer's voice. So, yeah. We will save the rest for next Saturday.
It's probably a combination of her psychological issues, such as fear of abandonment, whatever the term was that means fragile ego, things like that.
And yes, Saturday, noon Eastern time. And next Saturday is Easter, by the way. Are you free on Easter, Dave?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it's not Easter for me. Sunday is Easter. So Saturday I'm free. I don't think I have anything going on. I think we should be good. No.
Yeah.
I take that back. I'm sorry. I do. I got to go to Ohio. I got to go visit Farrell. Or at least their homeland.
Okay. I have to check as well, because Easter in Sweden is quite important. With meeting up with family and stuff. So I have to check that. So
yeah.
But that would be the first Saturday in that case. The first time we don't have a Jodi stream.
The first time in almost a year. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. But I still have to check, because if I do have no plans, I will stream and I will force somebody to join me. And yeah. But
sounds good.
Yeah. So Saturdays, maybe not next Saturday, but generally Saturdays at noon Eastern time.
That's right.
And yeah, and Dave will have a stream later today. I will have my serial killer Saturdays at around 5 or 6 p.m. Eastern time, something like that. But that will be more or less Rumble exclusive. All right. That's
Thank
it
you
for
all
us
for
for
joining us.
today. Yeah, thank you all for all the thumbs up, all the...
Even though Nick won everything.
Oh, poor Dave. Poor Dave.
Checking one more time here. Oh, we're even on the thumbs up. Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah. Then we can... All right.
Oh, no, we're
See-
not. I'm sorry. I lied. 81 to 60. Pathetic.
Oh. Yeah, Justin. Nick always wins. And with that, thank you all for being here. See you around on the next streams. Bye-bye.
The State of Arizona versus Jodi Arias verdict, count 1. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action upon our oaths, do find the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder.